but you have a sense that there is more to know. Where does this sense that there is more to know? You think that the computer has a sense that there is more to know? I mean, and so that he wants to know and he uses his free will to know something? No, the computer has no consciousness and no free will. So, but science is telling us that we are like a computer, and this is the problem.
Federico, thank you so much for joining me and for this time. I was thinking I should start by saying happy birthday. And I realized that's actually a very unique thing because that was the day you became conscious. And I happened to be talking to you on your birthday, and this subject of consciousness and reality and life is going to be the theme of this. But before we start that, I speak to you today as a man who studies consciousness, who is seeking this knowledge that is very unknown and trying to go into new terrain. But before that, you were this extremely successful computer engineer, a scientist, an inventor, an entrepreneur. Before this experience that sort of radically shifted you, which we're going to unpack in this interview, how would you describe that Federico Faggin? Who was that man, and what was he doing with his life?
Yeah, well, I was, as you probably know, I was born in Vicenza, in Italy. Vicenza is a town near Venice, northeast of Italy, and grew up during, the World War II, and went to technical high school. My father was a professor of philosophy, interested in, actually, it translated the Enneads of Plotinus. He did work on the Meister Eckhart, Schopenhauer. So he was a philosopher interested in the idealism, but I couldn't care less, frankly, because I was interested in machines. How do they work? I can understand machines. The rest of it was too complicated. So machines, I can see how they work. And so my idea was to become to design, first become a pilot of airplanes, and then. But then I had to, I had a problem with my eye, and so I had to decide that if I couldn't fly, I could at least design and build them. So that's what my interest was at that time. But then I ended up choosing a different road simply because the School of Engineering where I went, it was a technical high school, stopped to give that specialization. So I ended up in electronics, and I became enamored of transistors, these special things that can do much better work than vacuum tubes that were used in those days, and computers that were a new thing. I'm talking about the mid-50s. So computers, the first commercial computer was in 1951. So it was a new idea, and then I worked after graduation. I worked for Olivetti, a company in Italy that was in computers in those days, and I designed actually a small experimental computer when I was 19, and I built it, and it worked. Okay, but then I decided that it was, I needed to go to university and study quantum physics, because quantum physics could explain how transistors really work. I wanted to understand. So the core aspect of me that is also here, in my, what I call my fourth life, is understanding. I want to go deeper into understanding. I'm not happy with just having, a simple explanation that is, operationally is perfectly fine. You know how they work, so you use them, and that's fine. But I wanted to know how they work. And that depth of understanding has been a conduit all my life. So I went on, have a degree in physics in the University of Padua near Venice, not too far from Vicenza, and then I worked in Italy for a few years, and then I came to the States in 1968. At that time, I understood, the new generation of transistors that were MOS. but they had lots of problems. And I worked for Fairchild in 1968 and 69 and early 70. And in 68, I developed a new technology to make MOS transistors that were much, much better. They were 5 times faster. You can make them half the size, half the area. They could use half the area of silicon. They had much lower leakage currents. And with that, you could do everything that before could not be done, like the memories, the random access memories could not be done with the previous MOS technology because the leakage was too high. You couldn't do the microprocessor because you couldn't put all those transistors in a single chip. You could not do the CCDs, and you could not do the memories, non-volatile memories. They could be done only with our technology, with my technology. So this is called MOS silicon gate technology. It was the technology that Intel took to start. They basically copied it and started Intel, which you know Intel. So I joined Intel 2 years later, in early 1970, and Intel had a project there that was sitting because nobody knew how to do, and it was a microprocessor, and it was a custom project for a customer. And with my knowledge and with a couple of more inventions of mine, I was able to build the first microprocessor in the world, the 4004, the Intel 4004, and all the first generations, the 8008, it was the first 8-bit microprocessor, and the 8080, it was also architectural, my idea, and also I designed it. I led the design, but I was the key leader in that project in 1974. And again, why was I able to do that? Because I wanted to understand things. So by the time it was time to design the microprocessor, I understood computer architecture, logic design, circuit design, chip transistors, how they work, how to build them, how to invent new ways of building them. And so I had all the pieces in order to put together into a single chip all this knowledge. Very few people, if none, at that time had my knowledge, because here people are specialized, right? The guy that does logic design doesn't know very much about circuit design. The person that does circuit design doesn't know very much about technology or logic design, and on it goes, right? So it would take a team to do something that I could do by myself, but only by doing by myself, I could, inside my head, put together all the pieces in the optimal way to do it. And then when people saw the result, they say, "Oh my God, wow! Now we can copy what the techniques that I used. They were copied, and other people could do the same thing." So that's what I did. And then I decided to start my own company. That was end of 74, and that was Zilog. There I developed the first microprocessor that was of the third generation. The second generation was the Intel 8080, and that was the 8080 and Z80 was the microprocessor of Zilog. Created the personal computers. Basically, all personal computers that could do anything useful. They used third generation microprocessor like the Z80, and so from there, I went through this experience of starting companies. I started 3 companies before I woke up to the fact that there is more to life than just what I was doing. And but my interest has always been to create something new. So creativity and understand what I'm doing.
Right.
Go deeper into the understanding.
Just as a quick aside, your invention of the microchip processor, if you could take a moment to sort of brag a little bit, is if you could describe briefly, like how revolutionary was that to allow us to have what we have today in computers? I'm just curious. I don't know much about that, but I know that you're credited. It's a big deal what you did.
Well, in those days, people were thinking that in some future time, we will be able to build a CPU, a central processing unit of a computer in a single chip. There were already in 69, there were already computers built with many chips, right? But when you do that, apart from the cost, it costs a lot more money, but also the speed is not as high. because you lose a lot of speed to get signals that go out of the chip, go into another chip, and so on. Where if you do everything on a chip, everything is very small inside, and so all the parasitic capacities, all the loads, everything is faster. Okay, so when you do that, it's cheaper, faster, and most importantly, it's also smaller, so that you can put an entire computer. Eventually, this happened, 7, 8 years later, we could put an entire computer in a chip. And so now an entire computer could go into a toothbrush. The idea that you could put a computer that in those days where it was a big box, right? That you could put a computer inside a toothbrush. Nobody could have that idea because they were too big, right? So it was incoherent that you could do something like that. And also they would dissipate kilowatts of power, where instead of 10 milliwatts or 100 milliwatts, you see,
right?
So that's the so now with a computer on a chip, you could do an unbelievable number of things, and the faster they go, the more things you can do, and this has been the progress that we have seen,
right?
But most important, a second most important thing is that you can do with software what before would have required a specialized hardware. So now with the same chip, you can do many things instead of doing only one. Before you would build a system that does this, and you can only do this. And if you want to do something else, you have to build another system with different electronics, where computers, they can be programmed, and therefore you can do with the same chip many different things. That's why a personal computer can do a million different things, depending
Fascinating.
on yeah,
super fascinating.
The idea of computers was already there. So the technology that allowed to do the microprocessor was my technology, the MOS silicon gate technology. That was the only technology that could do it. And so everybody then adopted the silicon gate technology in the world and became practically the only technology for 40 years to make advanced integrated circuits.
Right. Absolutely fascinating. And just I wanted people to understand like how big a deal that was. And it makes sense because as things got smaller, right?
The beginning of bringing computers to the masses.
Yeah, absolutely.
Computers as a general purpose component to do anything.
Yeah, that's amazing. And so and then to take the turn here, it's so you've created this, you have made an invention, you're helping change the world. Presumably you've made millions of dollars. We won't get into the specifics of your financials, but you're doing well for yourself. You're married, you have a family. You should be the happiest man in the world. And then, you describe being but feeling empty sort of and unhappy. And it leads you to this moment in 1990 that ends up being super profound and changes your life forever. Could you just unpack a little bit of a build up to maybe that night and then what happened?
Yeah. Well, so I was, as you said, quite successful. And my first company was successful enough that in 1981, when I sold my stock to the investors, which was Exxon Enterprises, so Exxon, the oil company, I made enough money that I didn't have to work anymore if I wanted to, right? So for the first time, I had achieved everything that that you might want to achieve in life. I had a beautiful family. It was, everything was, everybody was, was healthy, and I had been successful in my, previous career. I was fairly famous, and obviously only in the area, in this kind of area in which people understand, which is a little esoteric. In those days, semiconductors were esoteric, and microchips, what are they? Was not something that was visible outside so much, and I had made enough money that I was supposed to be happy, but it was the beginning of a malaise that I was feeling, but I pretended not to feel it because I wanted to do another things, and I wanted to do another thing, and so on. So by the time we got to to 86, I started a company called Synaptics to make computers that would learn. Why would I do that? Well, again, because I wanted to understand how the brain works. Like I wanted to understand how transistors work. Back in 1961, 1960, 1961. Now I wanted to understand how a brain processes information. And of course, there were the neural networks that were beginning to get some interest, and I perceived that was the way to go. And in fact, the early years of synaptics, myself and the team that I had proved that in fact neural networks were the way to solve AI problems that AI had never been able to solve. And by the way, AI took another 20 years before they adopted broadly neural networks. In those days, they considered me a crazy man that thinks that neural networks can do anything useful. And those were the ones that know AI, the ones that really, okay. And so those guys, actually, had not seen that was the correct strategy to do AI, especially the pattern recognition of very complex patterns that they never succeeded in solving with their own techniques. So I wanted to do that. And I was studying neuroscience because I wanted to understand how the brain works. I was studying biology to understand how the neurons work. And so I was doing a lot of personal studying and development. And at one point, I asked myself, but these books that describes, how the brain works, describes signals. They describe electrical signals, biochemical signals. But if I put a piece of chocolate in my mouth, I feel the taste of the chocolate. Where is the taste coming from? The taste cannot be electrical signals. How can I transform electrical signals into taste? So that was I discovered what was 8 years later called the hard problem of consciousness by a philosopher called Chalmers. I discovered by trying to understand, right, which is what I always wanted to do since I was a kid. I want to understand how things work. And well, I couldn't understand. And I tried to, because at that time I had bought the materialistic credo, everything is matter, and so everything can be explained with matter, interaction of molecules and particles and so on. And, basically the worldview that we have today, which is a materialistic worldview. And so I was trying to understand how can you get consciousness from something like from information, like, in those days, like in these days, consciousness had to be an epiphenomenon of the brain, meaning it's not even a phenomenon. It's something that happens in the brain. It can only happen in the brain. Is connected with the functioning of the brain, and somehow, and so that's how sensations and feelings come from. But I wanted to understand, how do you get from electrical signals to sensations and feelings? And so I started working in my spare time, trying to make a program, a computer to have sensations and feelings. And that was when I realized that that's impossible. There is nothing in the what we know that can produce sensations and feelings, what philosophers call qualia. The fact that we, what the brain has electrical signals, by I feel the good taste of chocolate. And so where does that come from? All right, so that was a problem. And so I realized that somehow consciousness has this capacity to translate electrical signals in taste or in shapes and colors and what we experience in the world. But it could not be explained. And at the same time, at that time, it had hit me after a while that I was pretending to be happy because I had a company, I had to be successful, and so I was just pretending to be happy when I wasn't happy. And in fact, I was terribly unhappy inside, and I didn't know why. And that was a problem of consciousness. So, in this climate of being, trying to understand how to make a conscious computer, I want to understand consciousness because that's a problem that I have. I want to be happy. I thought that I should be happy, but now having done everything that the world says that if you do, you should be happy, and I wasn't happy. What's wrong with this picture? So, so clearly, the only way to find out would be to, to have some intuition of how something works or happens. And it came. It came one night during the holiday vacations of 1990. The winter, the Christmas vacations of 1990. I was with the family up in Tao skiing, and one night I woke up. It was around midnight. I was thirsty, so I went to the kitchen, got a glass of water, went back to bed, and thinking nothing, just trying to go back to sleep. And while I was in this sort of quiet place, from my chest comes out, an energy that is physical energy, but it's white, scintillating. Wow. And it is a love so profound, so deep, and so much stronger than anything that I've ever left. And it was crazy, because how can I be the source of this love? I mean, I was baffling. At the same time, my body was vibrating. And as I was, perceiving this thing is sort of, boom, it blows up and sort of expands into this white scintillating light that covers everything. So now I see this thing, and all of a sudden my consciousness is also in this thing. And I say, oh my God, this is the stuff of which everything is made. And so, it's a thought. So my body was vibrating. Yeah. My thought was, oh, this is the stuff of which everything is made. And I was the stuff that I was looking. So I was both the observer and the observed. Oh my God. I mean, you can imagine right now, this kind of experience is sort of mind-blowing in a way. And then I realized that this I can say now, but I realized intuitively that I am a point of view of everything to itself. Because everything that was out there was still me, because my consciousness was there. Who am I if not my consciousness? So my consciousness was out there. It was also in my body, but it was also out there. And I realized that stuff that is there is also me. So my God, right? So that experience that, there was no time while the experience was going. I mean, there was no sense of time whatsoever. But, if I had to guess how long it lasted, it was probably a minute. So, just boom. And that changed my life from this way to that way. Just turn it around. Because before I thought I was separate from the world. Now I am the world, observing itself with my point of view. My point of view didn't change. My sense of who I am did not change in this experience. It's still me, but now it's a much vaster me. I'm everything that, I'm the whole that looks at itself with my point of view.
Absolutely fascinating. Now, question, I was thinking when you were talking there, how did you discern and know that it was love? How did you know? You described it as love. How did you know?
Have you ever felt love for a woman or for a child? Or, in those days I didn't know that I could feel love for myself, because you only love something other than you for some reason. And so for me then, just feeling that love was coming out of me in that sense. I mean, it was how can I be love? How can I be a source of love? And it was incoherent. But here I was, and this love that I was feeling was mixed with joy and with a sense of being at home. This is me. So this love as the sense, this is me. That's being at home means this is me. And joy, because it was joyful. It was, but it was fundamentally love. And a love maybe 10,000 times stronger than the strongest love I had felt before. I mean, how do you know that it's love? Because you know that it's love.
Right. And
because consciousness is what allows you to know. Consciousness is how you know, you see?
Right. So so many follow-up questions in this. I'm excited. This is awesome. With the word consciousness, right? How would you define that, right? Like, we're going to get into your study of it more like scientifically, but if someone said to you, well, what's consciousness, from what your experiences and your wider, more deeper thinking on it, what is it?
Well, it's the capacity to know by experiencing what you know. In other words, it is a self-reflection. You know, is this energy, if you go back to what I said earlier, right? If everything is, you are also the world, then whatever is in the world that you observe, the observation of that thing in the world creates an experience that is a knowing, that is a, you know what you experience. In some ways, you become what you experience. For example, consider when you're a child. When you're a child, you probably have the same experience that most children have, which is basically when you lose yourself in a game, you become the game. You are into the game is with such an intensity that you forget everything else. You are the game, and you know by being what you know. That is consciousness.
Right. Wow. To go back to that moment, because you're describing this experience, and I'm someone who seeks out experiences like that. I think I've had experiences like that, but the way you're describing yours seems to be quite powerful and more powerful than a lot of other experiences I've heard about. I'm curious too, and I assume the answer is yes, and I haven't heard you say otherwise, but you were completely sober in that moment. It's not like you were like, what was you were physiologically before that happened? You were in a normal state?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I don't, I didn't even have, probably had a glass of wine during dinner like I normally do. So, I'm not, I don't drink, beyond normal with my meal. I drink with my meal, like I'm an Italian, so we are used to, wine is part of the meal, but you don't exaggerate. You don't drink, half a bottle or a bottle of wine, just a glass or two, and that's it. That's the end of it. So that's it. So I was very healthy before. I was very healthy later. So that's
so the recipe for that experience is one glass of wine and get up for a glass of water in the middle of the night. Is that the recipe? Yeah, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So I'm wondering too, because I can only imagine how intense that experience was. How long did you stay in that? I know you said the experience actually only lasted a minute, but when you came down to earth, like, were you buzzing and like consumed by the experience for how long?
I stayed with it, just to try to make sense of it for some time.
How long would you say?
I actually don't, maybe
days?
half an hour or something like that, and then I fell back to sleep, right? But fundamentally, that experience changed completely my perception of who I am. Before I felt separate. Now I am one with everything, and so. And that's what a spiritual experience is. Is your sense of unity with everything. That's what spirituality is about. And you know it by being it. You don't know it because you read a book. You don't know it because a friend tells you. You know it because you experience it. That's the only way that we can know, is by experiencing. Then we create symbols to communicate what we have known. And you can understand to the extent that you had an experience similar to mine. Otherwise, you don't understand.
No, and that's the thing. That's why, and that's part of the reason I was so excited to talk to you, because I was like, I get what you're talking about. I 1000% believe you, and I'm jealous all at the same time in the nicest way possible. And so when you came out of that, well, actually, let me start with this question first. That source, right? This thing beaming out of you, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Love, pure love. That's what everything's made of. What do you think that is or was? Because of course, a lot of people might use the word God. A lot of people and again, like you said, putting words on something that's almost impossible to describe. What have you come to say? What would you call that?
Well, I call it in one of the books, one of the articles, and also on the book, my book Silicon, I call it noosing, which is nous, which is higher mind, and sim for symbol. So nous it comes from a Greek word that is mind, and so is something that is both the carrier of the symbols, but also the carrier of meaning. And so there is something of which everything is made, which has an interiority, which is felt as the meaning of your experience, and an exteriority, which is what you can use to communicate with other beings like you that are also part whole like you. And I use the word part whole because we are, in that experience, I am a part of one, because I clearly am, there is more than me, so I'm a part, but I also am one, so I'm a part whole. Not right. A part that can be separated from the whole. I am connected to the whole. And by the way, a quantum particle is a state of a field, and the field is a quantum field, and the state is an excited state in the field that cannot be separated from the field. So look at that. Even an elementary particle described by quantum physicists, they don't describe an object. A particle is not an object, it's a state of a field, it's a condition of a field, and that condition, which is an excited state, meaning a state that appears in space and time, that state that appears in space and time is the symbol with which the field can communicate what it feels inside, that can only be known on the inside, exactly like our experience. That's the essence. Yeah. That is the essence of the new theory. And by the way, the quantum information has exactly the property of an inner experience, because quantum information cannot be reproduced. And so I say, if it cannot reproduce, it means, and if you measure a system which is in a quantum state, and you measure it, you can only get one bit of information per quantum bit, which is the state, how you represent the state. A quantum state is representable by quantum bits that are entangled. And now we go into quantum physics.
I actually want to get you to define quantum in a second, but I just had a quick question before I kind of move on a little bit. So you've created this way of thinking about it. But for people, if someone says God, does that bother you? Is it when someone says that, how do you feel when they're like, oh, you're talking about God, or that's what I think God is?
I mean, to me, God is all that exists, and I am a part whole, therefore I have the potentiality of God within myself. And by the way, just to drive in this point of parts whole, is my body, your body is built in the same way. Every cell of your body contains the genome of the egg that created the entire organism. Think about it. Every part, every cell contains the potential knowledge of the whole. Contains the potentiality of the whole. Every cell.
Wow.
Every part contains the potentiality of the whole. That's exactly what I'm saying. I contains the potentiality of the whole, which is God. So if you want to call it God, it's fine, but it doesn't. You see, the point is that the God of religions is all painted in a way that is, that is kind of, But here, all you need to say is that the totality of what exists has to have certain properties, and I say the two properties that physics is saying that the whole has, and the whole is a world described is a totality which is holistic and dynamic. Holistic means that it's not made of separable parts. You cannot take apart a piece of one. of this universe is everything is connected. That's physics. Second thing, dynamic means it's never the same instant after instant. So dynamic and holistic, those are the properties of what I call one. One would be God, but is the one that is the least amount of properties possible that you can think of. Okay, so those two are the properties that physics says that the totality of what exists has, holistic and dynamic. I add one property. One wants to know itself. One wants to know itself. Right. So now that produces from the beginning, one has a purpose and a meaning. The meaning is the meaning of its own knowledge, and the purpose is that it wants to know itself. So now the universe has purpose and meaning, which science has denied to the universe. Physics has denied any meaning to the universe. Physics describes only what you can measure in space and time. But space and time, we know already, is a subset of a deeper space where quantum bits, entangled quantum bits, can exist, can be described. So all of a sudden, we are talking about a completely different way to conceptualize the universe and who we are, while changing nothing of what physics is saying in terms of the experimental validity of what they say. All that they say is fine. However, they cannot describe the interiority of nature. But they can describe quantum information, which is non-reproducible, has the same characteristic of my experience, which is private. So they have discovered privacy, but they never understood what it means. Now, with this theory, they can understand that it means quantum information is a representation of what we feel inside of ourselves.
Okay, so I think
represents an experience, represents an experience, but the representation of something is not the something. You see, the other problem with science or physics in particular is that they think that the theory of reality is reality. No, a theory of reality is a map of reality. Reality is the territory, and the territory is what you feel, what you know by feeling, consciousness and free will. That's the interiority of nature, which is ontology. Now, what you can express of what you feel is only a smaller part of what you feel, a bit per quantum bit, and must use symbols that can be shareable, that can be copied, that can be known, they are reproducible. So the classical symbols, like the symbols of a computer, are symbols that can be reproduced. And therefore, we can use to communicate what we feel. But what we communicate is always less than what we feel. Think about the love that you feel for a son or a daughter, you know.
Right.
Love, when you express it, I love you, does it express everything that you feel? Obviously not.
No.
And what you feel seems to have also an infinite depth. It can, something that is something unfathomable. A depth which is, and you know that there is more that you would like to know, but you don't know yet. But you have a sense that there is more to know. Where does this sense that there is more to know? Do you think that the computer has a sense that there is more to know? I mean, and so that he wants to know and he uses his free will to know something? No, the computer has no consciousness and no free will. So, but science is telling us that we are like a computer, and this is the problem. This must change.
Absolutely. I want to ask you about that a little later, but I just want a couple of things. There's so much that was fascinating. I caught most of it. I'm following with you. I heard you say too, consciousness, you believe sort of would predate materialism, material things, or predate what we might call the Big Bang or something like that. Is that true? Yeah. And how do you know that? Why do you believe that?
Well, because if it is, physics is already telling you that classical physics emerges from quantum physics. Okay? So I have described to you the conscious has to be a quantum phenomenon because it has exactly the characteristics of consciousness, which is privacy. It can be only known from the inside. I mean, science doesn't say it can only be known from the inside. Science says it cannot be reproduced. And if you measure it, you can know 1 bit per quantum bit. Quantum bit is an infinity of possible states. So while the bit is 0 or 1, so an infinity of quantum states is, represent the richness of what you feel inside, and what you can say is only a bit. Okay. So the experience, my experience of reality can only be represented by quantum information, because quantum information and only quantum information have the same phenomenology, the same properties of what conscious experience has, which is privacy and much deeper than what you can express with shareable symbols.
I see. I'm following you. So one thing too, when I'm hearing you talk, and it seems like because you see the world through this knowledge of the way things work, the way that a lot of people don't. And then you had this experience, but then you could go back to the old you and how you saw the world, and it still made sense. And that reaffirmed, because you're talking in mathematical terms in deep, like physicist language that most people don't understand. But for you and the way your mind works, you were like, oh, you get it now, and you can see the proof of it in what you know about how the world works at its lowest quantum point.
And basically what this theory has done is joining science and spirituality, is telling you that science is about the outer world, the description of the outer world. The way it's been done so far is the description of the outer world, symbolic world, what you can measure. What you can measure has to be reproducible. Right, and so that is the physics that we understand, but there is another, and that can be represented, by the way, with classical information, the bits of the computer. So that all that stuff is the stuff that science knows today, but they have not understood that when they talk about quantum states, quantum information that can only be represented in a much deeper space. It's called Hilbert space. Is an n-dimensional space whose dimensions are complex numbers. They must use complex numbers. So this richer space is where the interiority of nature exists, where consciousness and free will exist. And those two aspects are the ones that allow you to know from the inside, and that knowledge cannot be algorithmic. That knowledge is something that is connected with everything else, because the totality of what exists is holistic. It's not, you cannot separate. An algorithm is separate. Classical information is separate. The bit is separate. So you have 0 or 1, but a quantum bit is not separate from the rest of it. Are entangled. They have correlations in the states that manifest in the space and time are connected from the inside by this unbelievable property that is called entanglement, quantum entanglement, that creates correlations in these states that cannot be represented in space and time. They require a much richer space.
So it's interesting, right? Because the way you're describing it is, it's hard for me and probably the average person to understand, but I'm following it because, like I said, I get where you're going with how this makes you feel the oneness and the connection. But it's interesting because clearly you have a lot of frustration with the fact that scientists won't take this seriously. And to this day, presumably you're one of the only main people that really, really take this seriously. But when you say that stuff to other scientists who get what you just said, they know everything you're talking about, does it convince them, or they still brush you off, even if you can sit with them,
What happens is that they understand that there is something there that makes a lot of sense logically, but they cannot get it because they are wedded to a worldview that does not allow consciousness to be other than an epiphenomenon of the brain or a phenomenon of the brain. That is a prejudice that the scientists have. We all have. I had it before I had this experience. That experience erased that prejudice. It said, I cannot be what I thought. I thought I was separate. Now I see that I am the whole that observes itself with a point of view which is mine. The only thing that is mine is my point of view, my identity. That's it. That's my experience, in a nutshell. But that changes completely the idea of how the world is made. And only quantum physics can explain this. And in fact, this doesn't change. What I'm saying doesn't change at all quantum physics. It simply interprets quantum physics in a completely different way.
Right.
But the moment that you get it, and the moment that you accept it, all of a sudden, you can now, consciousness becomes the way with which you can know new realities, that there is no instrument that can get you there, because the instrument to know those realities is your consciousness, which is the one that knows. See, now we use an instrument to know, but consciousness is a much bigger and deeper instrument to know the reality, a vaster reality, which we have not given, we have not accepted as existing now, simply because we are wedded to a materialistic principle that says that only matter exists and consciousness comes later. But you see, life cannot be explained by science. Nobody can explain how out of matter that has no capacity to reproduce itself, you have cells that can reproduce themselves and that they are conscious. Where is consciousness coming from if matter is not conscious? It's impossible.
Right.
Like my first problem with trying to, make a computer conscious, there is no phenomenon that can tell you how to convert electrical signals or any kind of signals, any kind of symbol which is shareable, bits in experience. You cannot change bits experience, which is now people tell you that they, in 20 years, they will create computers that are conscious. BS, sorry about it, is not possible, because consciousness does not have the properties of bits. Consciousness is a private phenomenon that if it can be known, it can only be known by the system that is in that state, and that is me or you or the other. Okay.
Fascinating. So it's interesting, right? Because you're talking about your story and my story and millions of other people's stories. There's this personal experience that was so profound and so completed us and made us whole. And then it changed the way we thought about it. It opened our minds to all these things. What is it then, do you think, that is because for me, science complements what I used to think about religion. We used to think they were at odds growing up, and more fundamentalist ways are like, no, but I'm like, it all makes sense. It's all beautiful. It's all one. It's all connected. It's all hopeful. It's the creation is magnificent. But what is the bridge that scientists aren't getting, and what would it take for them to get it? Is it because they hate religion? Is it because they don't take the idea of God seriously? And even though you don't have to call it God, but what would it take to break down that barrier? Because I see them as totally complementary, like you do.
Absolutely, but you see, it starts with a way of understanding that is pure logic. The science wants rationality, okay, and only rationality. But then they cannot do it with only rationality because they need some people. They have imagination that can come with new laws that they're irrational, if you want. Where do they come from? But the majority of scientists only use the rational mind and work based on the work of others, few others that have created these laws that then they use and they explain things and so on. And they forgot about, because they haven't developed those capacities, but they could, if they were allowing themselves to do so, to develop that invention, the capacity to invent. Invention means it did not exist before. It's a creation. And that creation cannot come for stuff They can only rearrange what already exists. A creation brings something new into the world. And most people don't understand what a creation is other than people that are creative, because they know how they create. They know that something comes into your mind from some other space, and and now you have a clear idea that it must be that way, and then you work hard to transform that sense that you have into something that works, something that actually works. And that's what I have done all my life, because before being talking about this stuff, I was an inventor. And so I had to imagine stuff and then make it work, right? And that
it's fascinating.
That didn't come by changing randomly things and figuring out, in selection, the things that
something new
randomly. That's not the way the creation works. Creation is non-algorithmic. It doesn't start with an algorithm that you can exchange things, mix them up in different ways, and then you call creation a mixture of things that already exist. No, free will is not an algorithmic decision. Free will is a decision that no law can describe, no algorithm can describe, and that is the way in which you can understand the probability. What probability means truly in quantum physics, because the state that will manifest in quantum physics does not exist before the measurement. It doesn't exist. It's not that, that you don't know what it is. In classical physics, you don't know what it is and you call it probability. But in quantum physics, the state that will be manifested doesn't exist before the manifestation. It is a creation of free will of the conscious entity that wants to communicate what it wants to communicate, which is a symbol, which is a classical symbol that is shareable. But before the entity has decided what to express, there is no that symbol that will manifest is not. Nobody can know, because it was a creation.
That's fascinating. Before I forget, this idea of quantum, because I've heard the word quantum so many times and I have no clue, but just in a brief way, because it's interesting, the way I would say it, I'm going to sound like an idiot here, is just going smaller and like looking deeper and deeper and deeper and understanding at the deepest level how things work and where things are coming from. In a way, quantum is like, I think of it as small, but in a way, I think that's why when I say science and sort of spiritual thinking, they sound similar, because when I've had a spiritual experience, it's going deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. And I get to the core and this thing explodes. But what is that does that sound crazy to you? Or like, what is quantum and how does it work maybe in this idea of like this epiphany of consciousness?
Well, quantum is the nature of the exchanges of energy and matter that occur in the universe, which in the classical idea, there were atoms. There were the atoms in a sense quanta, but they were like little balls that would stick together or not, and so they were the Democritus atoms that will allow you to, in this conception, to create all kinds of all the different things that exist based on atoms, which are the smallest possible object that cannot be divided. So is indivisible, is hard, and it has certain properties that allows them to stick together or not. And so you can create these, with these ideas, people have gone on for, up until the early part of last century, when Planck, invented the idea of quantum as an exchange of energy there has to be that amount, no less, no more. Is a quantum of energy that is exchanged, and so any exchange of energy must happen with quanta, and the quanta are defined by the Planck constant multiplied by the frequency of the energy of the light that the quantum of the frequency, a particular frequency in which the light has to be exchanged. So in that particular solution of the problem of the quanta, that Planck was working on. So the idea of exchanges that cannot come with any amount that whatsoever, as small as possible. For example, with that explanation, certain phenomena, for example, the spectrum of the light emitted by a hot body could not be explained. The spectrum of that light had to continue all the way to infinity as you increase the frequency, where with this idea of a quantum an exchange of quanta, you could have a curve that would go up and then would go down again at high frequencies, because at high frequencies the quanta that had to be exchanged, they had to be whole, the whole quanta, and they were quite energetic. So and they had to be integer numbers. So you cannot exchange any amount that you wanted. So that would allow to explain this phenomenon that nobody understood. It was called the ultraviolet catastrophe, because it was just quantum physics give you the right description, but classical physics would give you an infinity, and so it was 0 versus infinity.
Is there, because that's some dense stuff, and it's fascinating, but it's like, is there a way to, like, in layman's terms, say how that relates to what you experienced in 1990? Or you wouldn't draw parallels. Like, was it a quantum experience you have? How did quantum physics play into what happened to you?
Quantum started that way. I give you a little bit of history. So it started by recognizing that exchanges of energy would have to occur not in any amount, but in specific amounts. They were called quanta, and of course those quanta are true both from energy and matter. So, for example, an electron being an elementary particle, you cannot exchange half an electron. You have to, the electron, you have to take it all, not half an electron or 2/3 of an electron or whatever. So from that point of view, an electron, for one point of view, behaves like an object of classical physics, but it's not an object, because it's a state of a field, because it's also connected with other objects in ways that cannot be explained, and that's the entanglement, in classical physics. So right. There are all kinds of new properties in quantum physics that don't exist in classical physics. And they're all collected into this theory, which is called quantum theory, quantum physics. So quantum physics describes a world in which it isn't just small things, because you can have a quantum, for example, a quantum liquid, which is actually macroscopic, in which all the atoms are in the same state. And so if they are in that same state, like liquid helium, for example, if all the atoms are in that state, they have crazy properties, like the super, there is no friction when the atoms move through each other, with each other, or things of that sort. Is called superfluids and things of that sort. So there are extraordinary properties that can only happen if the quantum coherence is maintained even in macroscopic scales.
And it's interesting too, because after you had that experience and changed your way in thinking and studying science, I also read that, or heard you talk about going to study the mystics, or seeking out people who were describing similar experiences as you, but not from a scientific purpose, but for much more like deep spiritual mystical experience. Who did you go look at, and what did you learn when you started to tap into that world that helped you understand your experience?
Well, I don't think that you could understand those experiences. I did not understand those experiences other than seeing, reading that people had similar experiences than mine, and therefore validating that my experience was not a kind of a bull BS, like science would define it. I mean, science used mystical like a derogatory term. Okay, so most scientists do that, right? So I wanted to find out if I'm the only crazy guy, or if there was other in the history, other examples of what I experienced, and of course I found many examples and also I had, for example, out of body experience. I mean, that's another crazy thing. My consciousness is not even in the body; is out of the body, somewhere else in the in the roof, in the ceiling of the bedroom. What's wrong with this picture? Is that an impression? No, it cannot be an impression, because it has the same validity of a real experience. I'm sober. I'm not drugs. I mean, I don't take drugs, and so this stuff happens, and it gives you a sense that reality is vaster than what I have known through science. But if you say that what you cannot explain cannot exist, which is what is done often in science today, that's not doing science. That's basically pretending that you know everything when you don't. Okay, so to me, those experiences, validating those experiences is important. So I found that there were hundreds of books that were talking about out-of-body experiences. So I'm not the crazy man, right? I mean, so are we all crazy? Well, wait a second, maybe the crazy people are the ones that don't believe that it's possible. And if they don't believe that it's possible, they will never even try to have it. In fact, they will refuse having. Or when they have an experience like this, they will go to see a psychiatrist to explain what happened, when instead you have to find within yourself the explanation of what happens to you.
Were there any particular mystics or books that you read that really resonated with you, that you kind of hold dear and kind of became, influential in your life?
Well, the Tao Te Ching, for example, and by the way, now I can tell you that the Tao Te Ching is actually talking about what is represented by quantum information that is not reproducible. Okay, the Tao start by saying something like that. I don't know if it's the exact words, but the idea is this: is what I will tell you is the Tao that can be told is not the Tao. The Tao, right. The Tao that can be told is not the Tao. What does it mean in terms of this new theory? The Tao is the inner conscious experience. That the meaning of the experience, the interiority of reality, the Tao that can be told, because what I can say about it is always a small part of what I feel. So the Tao that can be said, can be told, can be put into symbols that can be shareable, is not the Tao. The love that right. The love that I feel within myself is not the words that I use to communicate that love, because I cannot communicate that directly. I cannot transfer what I feel to another person. What I feel is private. I am the only one that can know it. That is the essence. So I don't know how long ago the Tao was written, but certainly more than 1,000 years ago. Okay, well, look at that. The Tao, the people at that time had already conceived, understood that there was something special about the experience, the conscious experience, the way that we know within ourselves. That is not the same thing as what we say. Today, scientists believe that a computer can be conscious. That would mean that, the program and the data of a computer can be copied perfectly. So it cannot be conscious because it's reproducible. My experience is not reproducible. But they claim that a computer can be conscious. That would mean that the experience of a computer, which is the bits in the memory, you change, those bits are the experience. Those can be copied. You see?
Fascinating. And Yeah, and it's interesting too, before I forget, you had mentioned your father, and it's interesting. What influence do you think ultimately he might have had when you look back? Because you also mentioned he studied like Meister Eckhart, and that's a deep mystical thinker with some he was revolutionary, right?
In fact, I never read those things. I read them later, and I found that many of the things that I arrived through my experiences, because I arrived in the attempt to explain my experiences, and I had many experiences, not just the one that I mentioned earlier. That was the first one that was open the Pandora's box. But in trying to explain all my experiences, so extraordinary experiences of consciousness, then all of a sudden I ended up with a description of a sort of a what you call it, a sort of cosmology, if you want to call it that way, which is very similar to what Plotinus was talking about and what Meister Eckhart was talking about. Okay,
yeah.
Which is the stuff that intrigued my father. But my father passed away a few years after after my experience, my awakening experience, what I call my awakening experience, and so I had not time to, unfortunately, to discuss it with my father, but it would have been nice to be able to do that.
That's so sweet.
Because really, my father, when he was here for the first time, he actually came only once in California to visit us when our firstborn was born. So here we are in 1970, sort of second part of 1970, the late summer of that year, and while he was here, he painted something, and he painted a picture. And it was at that time he was very much into Teilhard de Chardin. And in this picture, he was kind of rough things that then they're converging toward the light, and converging toward more shapes that are more perfect, and so on. And he quoted Teilhard de Chardin, and the bottom he said, "Tout ce qui monte converge." Everything that goes up converges. Okay, which is sort of the sense of of the returning of entities back to one. That kind of sense that Teilhard de Chardin wanted to me. So there you are in my and I kind of when he gave it to me, I liked it and say, wow, great, but I kind of I didn't tout ce qui monte converge didn't really convey much information to me. It's kind of a nice way of saying, but I was not into that stuff at that time at all. I was taken by 1970 I was designing the microprocessor. So
it's so amazing sometimes when we look back at life, the signals or the moments that were there that when we look back just kind of blow our minds. It's interesting too, just another one too, like you had your first experience was so powerful, but have you had other experiences like that? Because presumably you wanted to experience that again and perhaps sought it out, but perhaps not.
No, I mean, I frankly, I have been always open to whatever shows up, instead of, because if you try to repeat, somehow it was not in my genes to want to repeat something. Very seldom I've tried to repeat something. For example, I tried to repeat out-of-body experiences. I was never able to have a voluntary out-of-body experiences. The only ones that I had, they were spontaneous. So part of that was exactly the fact that when I tried to repeat it early on, certain things, they wouldn't happen,
right?
Because they are conveyed. The way I explain it now is that basically those are things that one should not seek, because the things that you really need is the understanding that comes if you take seriously just one is enough to understand what's going on, and you don't have to otherwise as if it becomes a form of addiction to some kind of is almost like wanting not to be where you are. You want to have
escape all the time.
It's an escapism. Yeah.
And so what's really interesting too, right? When profound experiences like that, I can attest to myself, especially when you tap into what you described and I would describe as like pure love. it can radically change how you perceive the world. And in some ways, I believe when you transcend, you leave a lot of things behind from your past. I'm wondering if there was anything, maybe it was the way you, like, way you viewed a certain people, or maybe your temper, or maybe you were angry at that group of people or something. Is there anything that, like, you see that experience just totally opened your heart and your mind to ideas that you were kind of angry towards, or pessimistic, or biased towards?
Well, I mean, when I had that experience, and right after, I wanted to clearly, it was clear to me that was a new, the beginning of something, of a new adventure for me, and I wanted to understand. And so I started going to a transpersonal therapist and trying to figure out what, trying to have some help there, but not because I was sick, because I wanted to understand, right? So it's a completely different motivation for me. Was I took that so seriously as truth, because the value of truth of that experience was stronger than any other experience that I had in my life. In other words, the experience brings with it the sense of truth. It's a direct experience. It was the first time that I had a direct experience, as opposed to something that was kind of, like a repetition of what I read about something. Of course, the direct experience is, when you put some chocolate in your mouth and you feel the flavor, the taste of chocolate, the taste of the cherry, or whatever it is that you put in your mouth. That's a direct experience. By the taste that you have. The taste brings the meaning of what you have in your mouth, not just the name, but also an inner meaning that you if you are interested, you got to go deeper. You got to concentrate about and trying to go deeper into it. But so the same immediacy that of knowing that you get from the taste or the smell and so on, or looking at something, that same immediacy was in that experience, but with a much stronger emotional component, and of course, for the first time, a spiritual component, which is the sense of being, and a synchron, and also the body was vibrating. So, like, every cell of my body was resonating. They were, it was a kind of a, also the physical was into the same experience. So it was a resonation of all four levels of reality that we have, which is the physical, the emotional, the mental, and the spiritual. So, for the first time, my entire being was in that same, was sharing that experience. And that was what was giving that experience I would say, a truth that could not be denied. Denying that is like I'm denying that I exist. It was stronger even than the feeling that I exist. It's much stronger, because the feeling that I exist is certainly powerful, but it hasn't the same intensity that is dead, because it was physical. As I said, all those four levels were connected, were within it, in union.
Right. It's interesting, right? Because I guess it seems like what you're also saying too is you're a really nice guy who didn't like hold any like really negative, hateful feelings that maybe were transcended by that. Because I was thinking, and I grew up as a Christian, and I was just thinking when you were talking, like in the Bible, Saul becomes Paul after he sees this light. And just if you think it metaphorically, regardless if it's true or not, or the history is true, it's like he was killing, persecuting Christians. He sees this light, and then it changed everything. So I was curious about that, because I used to be like, Christianity is the only truth. And after I've had these experiences, I'm like, I see it in Islam. I see it in Hinduism. I see it in the scientists. I see it in the atheists. So that too is what I was saying, is sometimes these transcendent experience just like radically change the way that you do, because you are love, but you see love everywhere after that. And you love it, and you see it, and you affirm it, even if it's something that you used to think, well, it can't be because it's a gay person. It can't be because they're trans. It can't be because they're Black. Like, No,
but that was the, that was the first experience that allowed me to be very clear about what love is. Before, love was a kind of a concept. Of course, you would feel love, but it's kind of, it doesn't have this. I mean, this thing was physical also. You see what I was telling you, this energy was also physical. It was not just, it was not just an idea or a thought or an emotion that is not connected to the physical body. No, this has all those characteristics. So it was an emotion, but it was also a thought, or the motivator of a thought. It was also the motivator of this body that was resonating. So it was also a force. You see, so love is now, to me, is another word to speak of the foundational aspect of one. But it's also a substance, right? Because just to say physical, what does it mean? It means that there is something more than just abstract thought. There is some substance, there is some stuff there.
When you had this experience and everything changed for you, you were at a time of, you were suffering. When I've had experiences, I was suffering. And because of that suffering, I found true love. And the mystics all talk about this, right? Like the only way to understand God or reality or whatever you want to call it is through great love or great suffering. So you experienced this thing, and you sensed and you came to believe that love is what this is all made of. So how do you, as the mystics and I, wrestle with it? How do you understand, well, where is all the darkness coming from? This question of suffering, they seem combined, but how can they be combined forces? What do you think about that?
Well, to me, evil does not exist ontologically. In other words, is not, it exists only as a misunderstanding, only the lack of understanding, and suffering is the while we are in the body, because I believe that my consciousness and my free will, the fundamental property and who I really am, I'm not the body. So I did not say that before, but I'm not the body, though I control the body, and the body allows me to have lived experiences. I have an experience which is lived through the body. So it's a deeper level of connection with the body than an abstract thing like I control a robot. But if I control a robot, I don't experience anything of the robot. I simply give some commands and that's it. But the kind of unity that there is between the matter of the body, which is quantum matter, I call it live information, is a completely different, is an information which is between quantum information on one end that represents only interiority, therefore represents feelings, represents qualia, represents meaning. That's quantum information. Classical information is basically combinations of particles, atoms, and so on, incoherent, and so that has to behave deterministically because he has to represent bits, and the bits have to behave deterministically. But and the live information is something which is in between that nobody has figured out, and I'm the first that I know of to introduce this concept, because it's like a particle being connected with the field cannot be separated from the field. So how can you claim that the particle is an object? It cannot be an object, and objects are separate. So it is a state of the field connected from the inside by entanglement. So, a state of a field is something that cannot be separated. So live information is information that still remains connected with one, with the totality of what exists. It's connected to the fields that create this information. And so it's the classical information which is disconnected from, is only an abstraction. The bit is an abstraction, a human abstraction that requires a physical support. But the physical support must be deterministic. So it can only be a combination of live symbols, live information, atoms and molecules, sort of a chaotic one, sufficiently disconnected that the quantum properties are no longer part of that structure.
So the question of evil or suffering is a part of chaos within that at its quantum level, but you don't believe like consciousness, it like precedes the material world. You almost saying like you think suffering or evil is a material reality? Is that what you're saying? Or maybe I misheard you.
No, what I'm saying is that, but I went a bit by the tangent as I was, trying to explain.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, but basically what I'm saying is that because these entities that exist in this vaster reality, so they are not inside the body. I'm not the body. I am a quantum. I'm a quantum entity. I call a Sati. This type of entities exist in this vaster reality. So when the body dies, I don't die because I'm not the body. So the body is a tool that I use to have an experience in this world, this classical world.
Okay.
Through the body. And so and that experience is so that I can know myself more, because my objective is the same objective of one, which is to know itself. So one wants to know itself. When one knows itself for the first time, brings into existence what he knows, because knowing and existing are two faces of the same thing. So when one knows itself, it brings into existence entities with the same, they're parts whole. They are a part, but they contain the potentiality of the whole. They want to know themselves. Then these entities are the ones that then want to know themselves and so on. But because what they know, that has to be expressed with symbols that can only say a portion of what they know.
Right. So to know one, sorry,
now you can be confused. Now you may believe that you have understood what I'm saying, but you didn't, because and so out of this comes distortions of understanding, which then they can grow and they becomes evil. And then we are here to find out what these distortions in our own understanding have, in order to clear it up. But it's not the ego that clears it up. It's this vaster entity that clears up all these problems.
Right. So if I'm understanding you correctly, to know oneself, like you had in your experience, is to know love, right? Yeah. And that is what we find when we get there. So anything that's not that is something else, and we can't, we don't find, nobody finds hatred and suffering there. So it's love. So that's really beautiful.
Words, in other words, that is, darkness doesn't exist. Is the fact that there is no light, and in other words, is the fact that there isn't something that, but the fact that there isn't light doesn't mean that darkness exists. Light exists ontologically, but darkness is light not there. And the same is evil, is basically comprehension, understanding. When there is no comprehension or understanding, there is evil. Okay, but it is lack of understanding, lack of comprehension, lack of knowing, lack of comprehension, essentially, lack of meaning. So,
and I think for me, one of the things that keeps me up at night, that makes me angry all the time, is I get what you're saying. I've also lived a very privileged life. Like, I have never needed food. I've always had a house. My parents love me. I have lots of friends. I have a good job. I get to interview cool people like you. And it all makes sense. Like that reality is here and it's love, and it makes sense. We understand that, and we can avoid evil. But how do you make sense? Like looking what's happening in Gaza right now, watching an earthquake kill 1 million people in 1 second. Does suffering bother you? And how do you make sense of it when you see yourself, I assume, as you said it before, a very privileged person? What a wonderful life. Like, does it make you mad that it feels like so many other humans don't understand what we're talking about or get to experience reality in such a beautiful way?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's, basically, I have to go through my own suffering, and it was not a small amount of work to go through in order to not to suffer. And through that process, the suffering was the gate through which I knew myself much more, you see. And so if we did not suffer, we were, happy-go-lucky kind of guys without, everything is great, well, then what are we going to learn about ourselves? Why are we here in the first place, in a place where there is suffering? So what is the purpose of suffering? And that's, for example, why I'm a little, I don't have the same idea of suffering that some religions have. That you should not suffer. Well, suffering is simply a signal that tells you that you're not understanding something, and you need to understand it. So, and if you don't, you have to suffer more, because if we are here to understand, suffering has to increase until you get it, that you got to go through, but you don't go through out, you go through from the inside. The only understanding is inside of you, not outside of you.
And stuff like you're saying also makes me hopeful when you talk about consciousness not being destroyed. So my hope is that everybody, if your experience is short and painful on this earth, this is not it. So because so many religions, right? Do you believe this is not it? Whatever happens, this is not it.
Absolutely. And basically there are three levels of reality, right? There is the inner reality, which is the reality of feelings, the reality of meaning. And that's quantum, purely quantum. There is the reality of the body, the physical body, but the living bodies, and that's quantum and classical. The cells are quantum and classical structures. They're not classical structures like a computer. They're made, they're parts whole. As I remember that I told you early on, every cell has the genome of the whole, or the entire organism inside each of them. You think that a computer is made of similar parts? No, a transistor is simply a switch, on, off. That's it. So does the switch know anything or has the potential of the whole? No, not at all. Okay, so a computer is not, and many people talk about biology as if it was like a computer. Are you crazy or something? Not true at all. Have you seen a computer give birth to another computer that was built inside itself, like a cell does? Have you seen that? How can you say that a computer is like a living cell? You see, so all these things we have basically the wrong ideas. We want to continue to believe that our view of the world, which is materialistic, pure materialistic, is the way to do it. And so we don't want to go there. And what does that produce? More suffering. We believe that the only purpose, science believes that the only purpose of life is the survival of the fittest. How can that be? How can that be? How can 50 trillion cells that I have in, they build my body, are not cooperating? I mean, the level of cooperation of my cells in the body must be so unbelievable. If every cell was the survival of the fittest, they would try to live, compete with the next cell. Could a body with 50 trillion cells exist and be coherent as in its behavior? Absolutely not. So the principle of life cannot be competition, has to be cooperation.
So I have a hope that love wins, right? This concept of love wins. Is that something that you hold on to as hope? Because if I don't have that hope, then this world sucks for a lot of, it doesn't suck for me, but it's really hard and it's gruesome and it's effed up, to not swear in front of you because we just met. But it's like, if I believe love wins, if I believe that what I felt, we're all going back to that, or we'll all one day be a part of that, I can get out of bed in the morning.
You see, this belief is already cast in the conception of winning or losing. There is no winning or losing. One, all is wins. One is not separate. It's not made of good and bad or competition or cooperation. One is whole, and we are parts whole. Once we understand that, there is no winning and losing, because we are all together. We had to work together. We had to make it work together through cooperation, man. That's what it is. But now we are drilled into our head that life is about competition. Competition so fierce that survival, which means you die and I live because I'm better than you, that's wrong.
Amen. the whole world is freaking out about AI and that it's going to take over, but you've sort of reflected a few times in this interview that you don't believe it can become conscious. But so you're not afraid at all of where AI is heading, or how would you sort of like couch that?
If AI takes over, is because people of ill will have made AI take over. Okay? And so, and they can only do that if you believe that you are a machine. So there is an interest in you believing that you are a machine, because then you can be monetized and enslaved by AI, by those who control AI. This is absolutely devastating if that is what we allow to happen.
It would just be humans enslaving other humans through
absolutely
technology.
AI
right.
is a tool.
So
AI has no consciousness. AI doesn't know what it does, doesn't comprehend anything, and is simply an imitation of human beings that is passed as if we are flawed human beings because AI is better than you. Come on.
I'll just lastly by saying thank you so much for the work you're doing, for taking the time with me. I think it's brilliant. I think it's true. And I think it's worth studying. I wish you the best on whatever you discover next. And it was such an honor to meet you. And thank you for inspiring people like me and presumably a lot of other people out there. So thank you so much.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.